This is one of those things where I wrote a story. I can't remember if we talked about it on this podcast or not. The other little bit ago about Elon Musk and his DOGE folks screwing up their own website, and how my issue with it was that's not so much technically a legal story, but I couched it and I covered it as this is indicative of a problem, because if you've given read-write access to a bunch of programmers who can't run a website, it bodes poorly for the legal tech infrastructure of the government. It turns out that I was very ahead of my time, and the repercussions of that came very quickly. One of our biggest stories last week, the Securities and Exchange Commission was found themselves without Westlaw access, which you would think that a enforcement body would need, but they don't have it.
Oh, that's only if they're going to do the enforcing, Joe. Right. Now who's being naive?
Well, that's fair. That's fair. But they lost their access as part of Elon touting that they cut a $10 million Reuters contract with the SEC. This is part of the ongoing of all of these DOGE cuts. A lot of them seem to have fixation on cutting subscriptions to media outlets. Originally, it was couched as this idea that the government pays media companies to give them good propaganda. It then turned out that all that was actually happening is a bunch of government workers had subscriptions to read the news. But then they doubled down and started canceling those subscriptions too. Then it got to a point where Reuters said something that the administration didn't like. Elon and Trump started social media posts about how Reuters was involved in a long-term social distortion, client disinformation campaign with the government. They weren't. That was actually a separate company, but that's neither here nor there. That prompted them to send around everybody please we're going to cancel every government's Reuters subscription. Ultimately manifested at the SEC in canceling Westlaw, because Westlaw is owned by Thomson Reuters, which is not Reuters, but it is a company that also owns Reuters, the news service. So a cousin company.
How disturbed are we? And I know the answer is just shades of a lot, that retribution seems to figure prominently in a lot of policy decisions.
That's very disturbing.
Was disturbed the word? Was
disturbed horrified?
The word? Well, I'm just clarifying, because if disturbed is the word, not at all, because that's just been how things have been since 2008. What was it? There was a thing where Obama was talking. He made a joke at Trump's expense, and then Trump just had this mean look on his face. He was like, "I'll get you back." So all of this has been falling under Trump being disturbed for the last 12 some odd years.
But generally speaking, policy decisions were not, previous to 2025, most policy decisions were not, checking off my enemies list.
Everything Trump said he was going to do has been checking off my enemies, though. So now that he's in power, that this is happening, it's not surprising.
Well, except
or disturbing.
Well, no, except, for instance, he ran an entire campaign about locking up Hillary Clinton and then didn't prosecute her. Right. There is definitely something different about this administration and the kind of petty revenge. I was going to go not even to that.
We're only 2 months in, Joe.
One. We're only one. But
we're only 1 month in, Joe.
yeah. Only one. It feels like more, but it is only one. Now, my concern was more, it speaks to the real problem with, as a general matter, the problem with trying to pretend that this is some sort of government audit, which is what the dumb people who email me be like, I don't understand why you don't approve of Musk just trying to protect our spending, blah, blah, blah. This is not an audit. An audit would be a thoughtful, long-term, months-long process of going through all the government's receipts and making some suggestions. This is haphazard speed running our way to poverty. With that said, what worries me about that kind of speed run is, from a legal perspective, we just got rid of Westlaw, the one thing that they absolutely need. Apologies to LexisNexis, but it is a product that SEC needs. Yeah. And it was cut on a whim because they misunderstood that it was the same thing as Reuters, which they also probably shouldn't cut because that doesn't make any sense other than pettiness. But it worries me that this is going to become a longer term problem where lawyerly things are getting cut because these idiots don't understand what's necessary and what isn't. And while this was a legal tech story, apologies to Catherine, who hates when we talk about that, it goes further. We also saw, like, over the weekend, a lot of the JAG lawyers get fired at the DOD, senior folks.
The judge advocate generals at Army, Navy, and Air Force were all fired.
Right. And the leadership of the military's lawyers all getting fired, that spoke to a different question. Obviously, I think that was done with intentionality, that they don't want to have senior lawyers there to say things like Geneva Convention who, but
Don't know her.
But so that's done with intentionality. But between that with intentionality and what's going on in these legal arms of the government, where people are, where products are getting canceled that are necessary, where people are getting fired who are necessary and they don't realize how necessary they are to the functioning of the group, this becomes increasingly a problem.
I think that you're right that in this particular story, the lawyers are impacted, and having non-lawyers making these cuts, really speaks to it. But it's not just the lawyers kind of who are bearing the brunt of people who don't understand what's happening, making cuts, right? There was all these stories about, the only locksmith at, Yosemite or getting fired, and people in charge of our nuclear arsenal getting fired, and then trying to find them to rehire them when they realize who they actually fired. They don't know who they fired.
Right. And this actually that's a great point, and it allows us to segue into a story that wasn't on our agenda, but could be. Law professor Randy Barnett, who most recently had been the one who wrote the Wall Street Journal op-ed of, birthright citizenship is in the Constitution, but our theory is, what if it wasn't? He has now come out apparently on the firing of some of these national park workers and said, well, this is just malicious compliance, arguing that the reason why there's no one to open the door at the south entrance of the Grand Canyon is because there are plenty of other park rangers who could do it, but they're following, kind of like maliciously complying and saying, like, well, that's not my job, so I'm not going to do it. And that's really a way in which government workers are fighting back against this, and it's destructive and awful and whatever. First of all, he has no evidence for this, and he's making all this shit up, which is problematic. But it also brought me back to, wherein people don't understand how big the Grand Canyon is. The reason why the south entrance
canyon.
It's grand. It's right in there.
It's grand. It's in the name.
It's literally in there.
The canyon only needs 2 employees, but the grand one needs.
Like a little canyon, petit canyon. So the south entrance, which is the most popular one, they fired, apparently accidentally, they fired just the people who worked at that one, and then they are confused as to why it's not getting opened by the other people who work at the Grand Canyon. And, part of that is that it's hours away to get to the other entrances, because it is, say it again with me, a grand canyon. And you can't just say, hey, person in another state, drive all the way around this big hole in the ground that has no bridge over it to get here.
Well, I think the real solution is Trump just needs to rename it the Canyon of America, and then it'll no longer be the naming issue, and one person can staff it.
There's some person who's assigned to the north entrance who has to take a burro every morning down through the canyon and back up.
Yeah.
This is problematic. Why this is kind of a non-related story, but one that I thought made sense as you were talking about it. Like, we have law professors who are saying this stuff that is not their wheel of influence, so they don't really have a place to talk about it, but also that makes no sense. And they're just posting it, dragging down kind of the reputation, the hitherto sterling reputation that lawyers have for honesty and.
Yeah, it's really very wild what we've seen. Obviously, you referenced at the top when you talked about Randy Barnett. He also wrote that Birthright Citizenship article that was just dragged by a bunch of people about sort of its factual and historical inaccuracies from the right and the left.
Mm-hmm.
That was really kind of the heartwarming part about that story, right?
Yeah.
Is that it wasn't just liberals who were mad at him for writing it. It was a bunch of conservatives too. So maybe he's a uniter in a weird way.
Yeah.